Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are uh, taking a really long, hard look at something that I think sits in the back of a lot of our minds. It's that core tension of modern life, especially for anyone with any level of comfort.
We're talking about the ethics of luxury.
Exactly. The ethics of luxury in a world that is just, defined by this acute, desperate need.
Hmm.
We've gone through a whole stack of sources articles, some dense research papers, philosophical texts that all try to get at the moral conflict in how we spend our money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I think the best way to start is to set the scene, which the source material does with this.
Hmm.
This really stark, almost brutal contrast that I think we all instinctively recognize.
It's a contrast of decisions, really.
Yes. On one side of this invisible line, you've got millions of us making millions of decisions every minute about discretionary spending.
Right.
You know the calculations. Do I upgrade my phone now? Or
Right.
wait? Or is this high-end, locally sourced meal actually worth the price?
Should I invest in this designer bag, or should I put that money toward a big vacation next year?
Exactly. And these choices, they're about preference, they're about enjoyment, self-expression, maybe even status. They're all about enhancing a life that is fundamentally already secure.
And then on the other side of that same line, a line that can feel a million miles away but is financially often very reachable, you have decisions that are just harrowing.
Yeah.
We're talking about people who are forced to choose between the absolute essentials for life itself. The question isn't about preference. It's, do I buy food for my family today, or do I use that little bit of money to buy the medicine my child desperately needs?
Or, as the sources point out, sometimes there are no real choices at all. Just this cycle of absolute deprivation where even the minimum requirement for dignity is a daily exhausting struggle.
Right. And the vast majority of people listening to this, and us,
Right.
we live somewhere in that huge space in the middle.
Right in the smack in the middle.
Yeah.
We have stability, we have comfortable margins, and this is the crucial part, we have awareness.
Yes, the awareness.
Whether we engage with it every day or we try to push it to the background, we know that massive preventable suffering is happening on a global scale.
And that awareness is what creates the core moral tension we're diving into today. It's unavoidable, really,
It leads to that really challenging question.
which is it morally acceptable, or maybe even morally wrong, to enjoy those luxuries? You know, the extra comfort, the high-end experiences, the things that go way beyond necessity, when we know for a fact that those same resources could prevent severe suffering or even death somewhere else.
That's the mission, dissecting the logic of that exact dilemma.
And our goal here, drawing only from the sources we have, it isn't to give you a simple answer or a
Simple.
judgment.
No, that would be impossible and probably pretty reductive. Instead, what we're going to do is dissect the most powerful moral arguments on both sides. We'll analyze the common defenses, the psychological, and the structural ones.
And then ultimately try to build a kind of practical, reflective framework for living consciously. We're trying to cut through both the immediate guilt and the instant defensiveness to really understand the architecture of this moral problem.
And to do that, we have to start with clarity. In ethics, precision with language is everything.
Absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this. And we can start by first setting some necessary definitions as laid out in the sources.
So our source material kicks things off by creating a very specific foundational list of what they call basic necessities.
And the key point here is that these aren't just, nice to haves. They're not just desirable parts of a fulfilling life.
No, they're framed as the non-negotiable requirements for survival and for just a minimum level of human dignity. Without these, the whole conversation about luxury is it's moot.
It's irrelevant.
The list is pretty stringent. It's absolute. It includes access to clean, potable water,
Right. Drinkable water.
a sufficient and reliable food supply. And they stress this means adequate nutrition, not just, enough calories to not starve.
That's a huge distinction.
Then there's safe shelter. So protection from the elements, from disease, from immediate danger, basic health care, which covers preventative care and treatment for common life-threatening conditions.
Minimal personal security and then fundamental education. Enough to allow for self-sufficiency and to participate in society.
And it's really vital to grasp the conclusion the sources draw from this list. They say, without these basic necessities, life isn't just inconvenient or hard.
It is fundamentally and existentially threatened.
Exactly. When the sources use the word necessity, they are anchoring this entire debate to the highest possible moral stakes: life, health, freedom from this chronic debilitating suffering. And that sets the scale that all luxury has to be measured against.
And then you have the other side of the coin, Luxury.
right?
The sources define luxury as, well, basically anything that exists beyond what is demonstrably needed for that decent survival and dignity we just talked about.
So all the common examples we see every day.
All of them. Highly expensive, fancy restaurants. The constant upgrade cycle for high-end electronics, not the phone you need to work, but the latest high-spec model.
Designer brands that are mostly about signaling status.
Excessive or really indulgent travel, any kind of purely status-driven good, these things, their primary purpose is extra pleasure, convenience that goes far beyond just function or, social signaling.
But this is where the discussion immediately gets so much more complex, and I think this is where we need to really spend some time.
The gray area.
The huge gray area. The sources argue that this line between necessity and luxury isn't some fixed, bright line in the sand. It's a moving, blurring target, especially in our, technologically advanced, high-stress modern world.
Let's explore that with a few examples from the text.
Okay, let's take a holiday. Vacation. Is taking a vacation, maybe even an expensive one, purely a luxury?
Well, in a society that is increasingly driven by these insane performance metrics, where burnout and mental health crises are just rampant, the sources pose a really interesting question.
Which is?
Doesn't a necessary break, a period of real rest and separation from work, doesn't that start to shift from being a pure luxury to being a form of essential preventative mental health care?
That's a great point. The whole distinction just shifts completely based on your context, right?
Entirely.
Yeah.
If the alternative to that holiday is a complete mental breakdown that makes you unable to work and provide for your family, well, then that holiday is serving a very necessary function.
It's not just about fun at that point.
No, it's about maintaining the engine of your own ability to live a functional life.
Or what about the smartphone example? I think that's even more telling about how interconnected everything is now.
Oh, absolutely. 15, maybe 20 years ago, a top-of-the-line smartphone was, without a doubt, a pure status luxury.
For sure.
But today, especially in parts of the world with poor fixed infrastructure, that phone is often the single most important tool for participating in the economy.
It's how you access mobile banking. It's how you apply for jobs, receive government notifications.
You use it to help with your kids' education. You maintain the social network that is so crucial for economic stability. It stops being a toy and becomes a lifeline.
Exactly. So when the sources say the line is blurred, what they mean is that you can't just use absolute categories for ethical judgment. The problem isn't whether one specific item is good or bad.
The real friction point, the takeaway here, is about recognizing the immense power of resource allocation. It's the moral tension.
And that tension boils down to what?
It boils down to this. My resources are finite. I have a certain amount of money, and I am choosing to channel them toward my personal enhancement, my desire for a bit more status, my marginal increase in comfort.
While at the same time.
Simultaneously, that exact same amount of money, if I allocated it differently, could mean the difference between life and chronic suffering for somebody else. The moral weight is in the comparative importance of those two outcomes.
So the question is, does the ethical calculus even allow us to prioritize our marginal comfort over someone else's absolute necessity?
That is the question.
And that really sets the table perfectly for the most demanding argument we have to confront next, which the sources call the strong critique.
And this argument does not pull any punches. It doesn't compromise on the moral standard at all.
No, it states, without any equivocation, that if you have the ability to give up some level of luxury, some non-essential comfort, to prevent severe suffering or death that is within your financial reach, then you have a moral requirement to do so.
And the flip side of that is just as stark.
It is. Consequently, choosing not to act, choosing instead to prioritize your high-end consumption, that extra car, the elaborate home renovation, that choice isn't just, unfortunate or a bit thoughtless.
It's deemed morally wrong.
Which is a radical position for most of us in a comfortable society to even consider.
Yeah.
But it's built on these very strong, very logical, ethical foundations, stuff drawn from like utilitarian and cosmopolitan philosophy.
It really is. The first foundation is the idea of the moral equality of persons. This principle just argues that from a universal impartial perspective, a stranger's life, their health, their ability to live without suffering, it holds no less moral weight than your ability to buy an extra comfort item.
And the sources are really explicit here. They say that distance, whether someone lives across the street or across the globe, or their nationality, or whether you know them personally, none of that should erase the moral imperative to save a life when the cost to you is comparatively minimal.
We are all equally human, and our suffering matters equally, period.
And that philosophical flattening of the moral landscape, it leads directly to the second foundation.
Comparative importance.
Exactly. When you analyze the choices, you're comparing two profoundly different outcomes. On one side, you have you maintaining a very high, dignified, fully functional lifestyle. Maybe you just give up the most expensive 1% of your spending.
That's all.
And on the other side, you have someone else moving from the brink of starvation or dying from a preventable disease to having reliable food or clean water or life-saving medicine.
The sources are basically making a mathematical moral claim at this point.
Yeah, they are. The positive impact, the gain in quality of life and length of life for the person in desperate need, it vastly, overwhelmingly outweighs the minor inconvenience or the loss of a temporary pleasure for the comfortable person.
And that huge difference in comparative importance is what drives the ethical requirement. It's not a suggestion.
To make this idea, which can feel a bit abstract, really concrete, the sources use that classic, powerful thought experiment.
The analogy with rescue cases, this is where the logic becomes, for proponents of this view, pretty much undeniable.
Okay, so imagine this. You're walking past a shallow pond right now.
Yeah.
You're dressed well. Maybe you're wearing brand new, very expensive shoes.
Right.
And you see a small child thrashing in the water, clearly drowning.
Oh, wow.
All it would take for you to save that child is to wade a few feet into the muddy water. It's not deep, you're not in danger, but it will absolutely ruin your expensive shoes. That's a guaranteed monetary loss. The sources point out that almost every single person, regardless of their background or their beliefs, agrees on what you have to do.
You have to save the child.
You are morally required to save the child. The minor cost to you, the ruined shoes, which is just a financial loss and a small discomfort, is completely and totally dwarfed by the moral necessity of saving a human life.
And to do the opposite, to consciously choose your shoes over the child's life, that would be seen by anyone as an act of, well, moral depravity, a failure of basic humanity.
And here is the critical link that the strong critique forces us to make. We all accept that moral requirement when the suffering is right there, it's visible, it's immediate. The child is right in front of us.
But the proponents of this view argue that global poverty and distant suffering are simply many distant ponds that we can reach with money.
That's a powerful way to put it.
The only real differences are the distance and the mechanism of the aid. Instead of physically wading into the water, you click a button to donate. You redirect money from a luxury purchase.
So if that $5,000 you were budgeting for the latest home entertainment system could provide, say, a necessary surgery or months of clean water for a dozen families thousands of miles away.
The core moral equation, according to this view, hasn't changed at all. The suffering is just as real, the cost to you is still marginal compared to the benefit, and your ability to intervene is still absolute.
So the logical conclusion of this strong critique is it's deeply challenging.
Very. It concludes that buying high-end luxuries or any excess spending when that same money could prevent severe suffering isn't just a personal lifestyle choice,
Ethically is the same as choosing the shoes over the drowning child.
just with a longer chain of causation. And the fact that our entire comfortable world does this all the time, that doesn't, in the eyes of this critique, make it okay. It doesn't absolve the individual of that moral weight.
It's a profound, really a structural demand for a radical reevaluation of our personal economics and our moral duty. Okay, but that strong critique, as, compelling as its logic is, it runs headlong into the reality of human psychology and just the practical demands of life.
Of course, it's incredibly difficult. Arguably impossible to live your entire life by a standard that implies this constant crushing guilt over every single non-essential purchase you make.
Yeah, you'd go crazy.
Yeah.
So we have to pivot now. We have to look at the robust, common, practical, and psychological arguments that push back against this incredibly demanding moral requirement.
This is the other side of the debate.
And the defense often starts with that immediate common phrase we all use to justify our spending.
It's my money.
Exactly. And that phrase, it's a shield, isn't it? It immediately activates all these deep-seated cultural ideas about ownership and effort and meritocracy and individual economic rights.
It does, and the source material analyzes this defense by breaking it down into 4 primary arguments that people use to justify, moderate or even high levels of luxury spending, even when they know about global need. We have to really explore these to get a balanced view.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first defense is personal freedom and autonomy. This argument is rooted in the idea that for a society to be just and for people to flourish, individuals need to have control over the fruits of their labor.
The idea that I earned this money justly. The transaction was legal.
And so I have a fundamental right to use it to pursue my own life projects, my own preferences, my own pleasures. Proponents of this view argue that morality should set a floor for conduct, don't steal, don't harm, but it shouldn't set a ceiling on the level of personal comfort you're allowed to achieve.
So limiting personal spending too strictly, even for a good cause, is seen as infringing on that core value of autonomy.
Precisely.
But the sources do push back on that a little, don't they? They question the origin of the money.
They do. They ask, what if that money was earned through a system that itself relies on structural inequality? Maybe you work for a company that benefits from, say, poor labor standards abroad.
Does the moral purity of justly earned still hold up then?
It gets murky. The freedom argument is at its strongest when the earnings are truly disconnected from any form of systemic exploitation, which is rare.
Okay, what's the second defense? This one feels very potent.
It is. It's limited responsibility and the scale of need. This is basically the burnout argument.
The sheer size of the problem.
The sheer magnitude of it. Global poverty, billions of people needing aid. It's so immense that no single person or even a small group can possibly fix it. So the defense argues that expecting an individual to sacrifice all their luxuries until they're living at a subsistence level.
It's just a standard that is way too demanding. The philosophical term is supererogatory, right?
Exactly. It's heroic. It requires a level of self-sacrifice that morality should encourage, but it can't mandate it as a baseline duty for everyone.
And if the moral bar is set at give until it hurts everyone equally, the resources of the comfortable world would be gone in a flash, and the suffering would still exist.
Where do you draw the line? Does morality require you to forego, say, necessary dental care for yourself because that money could save a life elsewhere? Setting an impossible standard often leads to a kind of psychological paralysis.
Where you just give up entirely because the task feels infinite.
Right.
The third defense, this one shifts the battlefield completely. It's system versus individual responsibility.
This is a powerful, structurally focused argument. It asserts that the root causes of mass poverty are not primarily my individual spending habits. My new television didn't create global poverty.
Right. Instead, poverty is created and maintained by these huge entrenched systems, historical, political, economic.
And to give this argument real weight, the sources list some of those specific structural causes.
Yeah, things like the deep ongoing impacts of colonialism and resource extraction and war.
And the current structure of global financial markets, which often favor wealthy nations through things like trade barriers or intellectual property laws.
Endemic corruption, which is often facilitated by international finance. Power imbalances that restrict the economic sovereignty of poorer nations, often through these impossible debt burdens.
So if poverty is fundamentally a systemic, man-made failure, this defense suggests that real ethical action isn't about agonizing over personal purchases.
It's about demanding and supporting structural solutions.
Policy changes, institutional reform, tax justice, debt relief. In fact, focusing all that moral energy and guilt on individual consumption might actually be a distraction from the real large-scale political work that needs to be done.
So the solution is collective justice, not just individual charity.
Exactly. And that leads to the fourth argument, which is closely related. It's psychological sustainability.
This feels like a very practical, human nature-based counter-argument.
It is. It says that if the moral expectation is constant, relentless self-denial and chronic guilt over every small pleasure, that emotional state is just not sustainable in the long run.
You'd burn out.
You'd burn out. This constant internal conflict can lead to resentment, personal unhappiness, chronic anxiety, or as the source material puts it, paralysis.
So the paradox is that setting the moral bar too high might actually cause people to just reject the whole system of giving.
And they end up doing less, not more. It backfires.
So these four defenses, they really do succeed in their goal. They challenge that simplistic idea from the strong critique that all luxury is evil.
They absolutely do.
And they force us to consider this crucial question from the source material. How demanding should morality be?
And this is a fundamental philosophical divide. There's no easy answer. The demanding view, which aligns with the strong critique, it maintains that the obligation is non-negotiable.
If you can prevent serious harm without sacrificing something of equal importance.
Like your own health or the survival of your own children, then you must do it. Proponents of this view argue that if we accept that logic, then the typical level of giving in comfortable societies, which is, what, around 1 to 3% of disposable income?
Yeah, and often given impulsively.
It's almost certainly morally inadequate. This view requires a radical restructuring of our priorities, where preventing other suffering becomes the main ethical driver, outweighing everything but our own most essential needs.
And then conversely, you have the less demanding view.
Right. This perspective agrees that we have moral duties of justice and charity, but, and this is a huge but, it allows for a private sphere.
A space where personal projects and hobbies and comfort and the ability to have deep relationships can flourish without being constantly and immediately compared to the world's worst suffering.
It suggests that, yes, we have baseline duties to contribute and give generously, but we're not obligated to live in a state of perpetual self-sacrifice that just eradicates all personal pleasure.
When you connect these two views, the tension they create is just immense.
It's huge. If morality is defined too strictly, almost everyone in the comfortable world is living in a constant state of guilt because the need is infinite.
But if it's too lenient, we risk ignoring massive, preventable suffering that is absolutely within our collective power to fix.
So this raises that important question. How do we find a standard that is challenging enough to be meaningful, to require real effort?
But sustainable enough to prevent that burnout and moral paralysis that the defense arguments rightly warn us about.
That question really defines the whole search for a middle path.
Okay, so now we move beyond that immediate transaction, the choice between buying the thing or donating the money, and we get to explore a deeper, more psychological layer.
The motivation.
Exactly. Section 5 in the source material shifts the focus from the objective cost of the luxury item to the subjective motive behind why we bought it. Why do we even want luxury in the first place?
And the sources break our desires down into two very distinct buckets. There are motivations that are potentially corrosive and motivations that can be genuinely meaningful. And understanding which bucket a particular purchase falls into is often the key to figuring out its moral weight.
Okay, let's start with the negative ones, the corrosive motivations.
These often revolve around external validation or some kind of internal feeling of inadequacy. This would include the relentless chase for social status, using luxury items as, tokens to feel above other people, a kind of hierarchical satisfaction.
It also includes using consumption just to escape boredom or to paper over a sense of internal emptiness.
Or, and this is probably the most common one in the modern age, conspicuous consumption.
Buying things to impress strangers on the internet.
Basically, buying expensive things primarily to signal your wealth and your taste to people you don't know, often on social media, where the value is entirely in how other people perceive it, not in the joy or utility you actually get from it.
Okay, so what about the other side, the meaningful motivations?
These tie luxury to more fundamental human needs, things like flourishing, connection, restorative experiences.
So this could be purchasing an experience that genuinely lets you appreciate beauty like art or architecture or just the restorative power of nature.
Or it could be celebrating a real-life milestone with a sense of dignity, or sharing a rich, high-quality experience with people you love in a way that deepens your emotional bonds.
And that distinction is so important. The sources note that, the financial cost of taking a quiet, contemplative trip with your family that's designed to deepen those relationships might be high.
But its moral weight is completely different from buying, say, 10 designer handbags just for that momentary rush of public display.
So the ethical value is determined by the internal purpose it serves, connection, growth, not just the price tag.
The moral weight of motive is paramount. And the source material gives a really powerful warning here. It says luxury becomes spiritually and morally corrosive when it crosses three specific lines.
Okay, what are they?
First, when it's used as the yardstick to define your fundamental value, when your self-worth becomes your net worth.
Second,
When it becomes a constant, unsatisfying chase. This is the hedonic treadmill we hear about. The brief pleasure of getting the thing immediately gives way to the desire for the next, better thing.
and the third one sounds like the most dangerous, ethically.
I think it is. It's when luxury functions as a psychological shield. When your consumption becomes this sophisticated way to numb that uncomfortable awareness we talked about at the beginning.
A way to create distance and indifference from the suffering of others.
Exactly. It allows a comfortable person to live in their own self-contained, beautiful bubble, protected from the harsh realities of the world.
This kind of introspection, it naturally pushes us back out to the broader context. Section 6 of the sources reminds us, very emphatically, that poverty isn't just about individual selfishness. We have to grapple with the enormous scale of structural versus personal responsibility.
We touch on this with the defense arguments, but it's worth detailing why it matters so much. Poverty is deeply entrenched by systems that predate any of our individual purchasing choices.
You have to consider the history. The wealth of so many comfortable nations today is built, directly or indirectly, on centuries of colonialism, resource extraction, and exploitation in the global south.
And that's not just ancient history. It's a present-day reality that's enforced through things like debt structures and trade policies.
Yeah, take the role of global markets and tax policy. The sources point out that literally trillions of dollars are shielded every year in tax havens.
And that starves poorer nations of the domestic revenue they need to fund their own healthcare, their own education, their own infrastructure, the very definition of necessities.
Or when wealthy nations impose trade barriers that protect their own farmers, but they prevent developing countries from accessing those same global markets, that is a structural mechanism that perpetuates disparity way more effectively than my choice of watch ever could.
So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that if you want to be responsible, it has to operate on two distinct parallel levels to be effective.
What's the first level?
The first is personal responsibility. This is the traditional sphere, your immediate choices. How do I spend my disposable income? What percentage do I donate, and how effectively do I donate it?
How do I use my political voice? What are my consumption habits in terms of waste and where my products come from? These are direct, actionable things.
But then there's the second level, structural responsibility. And this requires a much more complex and demanding kind of engagement.
It's not just about donating. It's
Mhm.
asking, do I support political policies and institutions that are actively trying to reduce inequality?
Do I support fair trade movements or debt relief or reforms to global tax laws? Am I, through my investments or even my political apathy, complicit in systems that make inequality worse?
This demands that we move beyond simple charity and start striving for collective justice.
And the sources offer a really critical insight here. It is often significantly easier for comfortable people to, assuage their guilt by blaming themselves for having nice dinners and making a few small donations.
Than it is to actually confront the complexity, the inconvenience, and the political risk of challenging the vast, often invisible systems that create all this wealth disparity in the first place.
A truly serious ethic, the sources conclude, demands that you engage on both fronts. You have to modify your personal choices to be more intentional, and you have to work toward collective structural change to achieve real justice.
Okay, so we've meticulously gone through the demanding critique, the necessary defense, and the deep structural context.
Yeah.
This brings us to the critical phase, the practical synthesis.
How do we actually live with this knowledge?
Exactly. Section 7 offers what the sources propose as the possible middle path. It's a framework that consciously rejects those easy, paralyzing extremes of all luxury is fine and all luxury is evil. This is about building the foundation for an intentional life.
And this middle path, it isn't characterized by guilt or self-flagellation. It's about consciousness and conscience. It's a method for navigating this moral landscape with intentionality to ensure that our own pursuit of happiness and comfort doesn't result in harmful indifference.
So it provides some specific principles to shift us from just reactive, habitual spending to more proactive, ethical living.
5 of them, to be exact. And the first one is arguably the most powerful mental shift you can make. It's gratitude, not entitlement.
So stop seeing our comfort and our resources as something we automatically deserve.
Exactly. Stop viewing it as an entitlement. Instead, practice viewing these things as a gift of good fortune or historical accident or structural privilege. This simple internal shift immediately changes the emotional tone
You move from that defensive posture of, I earned it.
to a more reflective stance of, I am fortunate and fortune should be shared. This outlook just inherently encourages generosity instead of hoarding.
Okay, what's the second principle?
Limits on excess. This acknowledges the economic and psychological reality of diminishing returns. At a certain point, extra luxury adds almost nothing to your deep personal well-being.
The difference in joy you get from a perfectly safe, functional car versus a gold-plated hypercar is probably negligible.
Right. But the difference in potential impact, if that huge cost difference were redirected to life-saving aid, is immense. This principle encourages you to set realistic personal boundaries on waste or excessive display. It's about optimizing your spending for maximum meaningful happiness, not just maximum public status.
The third principle feels very practical, very critical for sustainability.
It is regular, proportionate giving. The goal is to make generosity a stable, predictable, and measurable part of your financial life.
So you're not just relying on random emotional impulses of guilt.
Exactly. By choosing a dedicated percentage of your income, a consistent tithe, whether that's 1% or 10%, and committing it to effective organizations, you are baking ethical behavior into your structural spending habits.
It protects generosity from your emotional volatility and ensures a sustained long-term impact.
Which is what the world actually needs.
Fourth, we have ethical consumption. This one requires some work.
It requires diligence and research, for sure. It means actively choosing products, companies, and habits that are demonstrably less harmful or more just whenever possible.
It's an acknowledgement that every purchase decision is also an investment decision.
You're either supporting or undermining equitable labor practices, environmental stewardship, and fair market principles with every dollar you spend. This is that practical connection between your personal choice and the structural responsibility we talked about.
It's about making sure your luxury, if you choose it, isn't built on exploitation.
And finally, the fifth principle. This one is crucial for maintaining that moral tension in a healthy way. It's awareness and contact.
So staying in touch with the real stories.
Yes. The source stresses the profound importance of staying in touch with the real, tangible stories of suffering, not just the abstract, numbing statistics.
Numbers paralyze us.
Stories move us to action, allowing this genuine, concrete awareness to gently but firmly shape your choices and your priorities is essential for sustained compassion that doesn't just rely on momentary guilt. It makes those distant ponds visible.
So if we apply these 5 principles, it forces us to ask that ultimate question, which is summarized in Section 8. How much is enough?
And since there is no universal answer, no moral spreadsheet that can define the precise maximum luxury threshold for everyone.
The sources just offer a set of guiding questions for personal application. It shifts the focus from some external rule to your own internal reflection.
And the first question for self-assessment is deeply introspective.
It is. It asks, when I really examine my budget, how much of my spending genuinely contributes to a deep, meaningful, connected life hitting those meaningful motivations we discussed earlier, and how much of it is just habit or reflexive pressure from my peers or pure vanity?
It's an exercise in trying to discern true value from just social noise.
The second question is intensely focused on efficacy and comparative utility.
It asks, if I consciously shifted just a part of my luxury budget, not all of it, but maybe reallocated the cost of one significant luxury purchase a year, what measurable, tangible impact could that specific amount of money have if I gave it to an effective organization?
It allows you to precisely measure your own moral power and the real weight of your choices.
And then there's the final overarching question, the one that forces that confrontation between your ideal self and your actual self.
When I truly reflect on my core values, fairness, justice, compassion, does my current lifestyle as a whole actually align with those values?
It's a moment of truth.
The process described here isn't about demanding absolute painful sacrifice. It's more about ethical refinement.
By applying these principles, you may not give up all your luxuries, but you will almost certainly simplify things. You will give substantially more than you did before, and most critically, you might permanently change your sense of what you truly need versus what you merely want.
And in doing so, make your life both more meaningful and more moral.
So we come back to the core question that launched this entire deep dive. Is it morally wrong to enjoy luxury while other people lack basic necessities? Section 9 provides the nuanced answer that's been developed through all these sources.
And the consensus we arrive at is this. In a world where so many people lack the absolute basics for a human life, enjoying luxury without any concern, without awareness, without generosity, or without any effort toward change, that is, without question, morally troubling.
But the nuance is so critical here. Morality does not mandate the elimination of all comfort and all joy and all beauty from our lives.
It's not about that. It's asking for examination and intention. It demands that we actively rebalance our own extra pleasures against the urgent, life-threatening needs of others.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we find that the problem isn't the luxury item itself, the beautiful art, the restorative trip, the nice jacket. It's not the thing.
It's the indifference.
That's it. The truly problematic element is luxury without awareness, luxury without generosity, or luxury that is actively built upon ignoring or exploiting other people.
So a morally serious life, then, has to integrate this awareness as a fundamental part of its structure.
It means consciously enjoying some of the good things that are available to you, but living that life with a profound sense of gratitude, not entitlement.
And deliberately and structurally committing part of your resources to reduce suffering and fight injustice. This whole exploration, it's not about establishing some fixed legalistic rule.
No, it's about establishing a profound ethic of intentionality. The journey requires you to engage both your compassion and your critical faculties. You have to hold your own comfort up to the light of the structural inequality and acute suffering that you know exists.
So what does this all mean for you? You came here looking for knowledge, maybe a framework for action. We're going to leave you with the final provocative thought that the source material poses, a question to chew on as you move forward and try to apply this knowledge.
It's a challenging one.
It is. Given what I have, what level of comfort can I enjoy with a clean conscience? And what would it look like to let my compassion shape my lifestyle more than it currently does?